dim the lights some. It's can see the screen better too. Let's just offer a word of prayer before we begin. Our Father, who art in heaven, we come humbly before you, acknowledging our ignorance and our weakness, and your greatness, your boundless wisdom, your goodness, your mercies. And we thank you for the laws of life and of health, and for the science that we're going to talk about this afternoon that you have embedded in the creation, and that we as human beings may come into a closer appreciation of your goodness and greatness, and that we may in our own lives, as far as possible, apply these principles, and if possible to grow our own foods so that we can avoid many of the hazards in commercial foods. We thank you for all of this in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let's see, pointer, I got the pointer right here. Oh, here it is. Figure out which pocket it was in. Okay. This is an interesting observation by Masanobu Fukuoka, who's a prominent Japanese horticulturist. He says the purpose of agriculture is not the production of food, but the perfection of human beings. It's an interesting thought, and it applies to everything we'll be talking about in the next few minutes. Dr. Charles Northern, medical doctor, in presenting to the U.S. Senate, made the following statement, recorded in the 74th Congress, second session records. I gave up medicine because this, referring to the regeneration of soils, is a wider and more important work. Sick soils mean sick plants, sick animals, and sick people. Physical, mental, and moral fitness depends largely upon an ample supply and a proper proportion of the minerals in our foods. We must make soil building the basis of food building in order to accomplish human building. We, in North America, are experiencing massive erosion of our soils at a rate 10 times, that's 1,000% higher than the rate at which these soils are being replenished. The rates of soil erosion in other parts of the world, such as Africa and Asia, can be 30 to 40 times faster, higher than the rate of replenishment. So our world is rapidly headed towards a degenerative process that is bringing on greater degeneracy of higher life forms, animals and human beings. Food grown in nutrient-deficient soils lack the nutrients essential to sustain the health of higher life forms. And this is in large part due to modern agribusiness technologies. We've had massive, not only soil fertility loss and mineral loss, but crop diversity losses, because agribusinesses generally engage in massive scale monocropping. And this has led to like 3/4 of the genetic diversity of the world's 20 major food crops to be lost from farmers' fields. Many years ago I was visiting the... Oh, do you have a question there? Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks for reminding me. Somebody's asleep at the wheel here. Okay. It's a little hard to get adjusted to running two screens simultaneously and also concentrate on what you're saying. Anyway, so we've lost about 75% of the genetic diversity of the food crops of the world, which is very sad. And many years ago I was down in Quito, Ecuador, and I visited, not far from there, the International Potato Center, which is part of the CGR system. And I was amazed to see not dozens, but hundreds of varieties of potatoes of every color, shape, size, texture, flavor you could imagine. Same thing with corn. The International Maize Center has hundreds of varieties of wonderful corns. We here in North America, we have maybe a variety, 5 or 6 varieties of corn, maybe 4 or 5 varieties of potatoes in the markets. So we really miss out on the incredible diversity. Ancient and traditional polyculture systems that were used by indigenous people as well as older cultures ensured plant diversity was protected and that the soils were regenerated. And of course, back then they weren't using toxic pest controls and also fertilization methods that actually poison the soil. Some will say that there's no difference between chemical fertilizers and, quote, natural fertilizers, that the synthetics are the same, but they don't take into account the life force factor. To quote from David Phillips from Soil to Psych, a synthetic chemical can appear to represent a natural one only to the extent a waxen image is a dummy of its living model. There is a difference between what is in nature and what is created in the creation of chemicals that are of a synthetic nature. The nutrients of synthetic fertilizers don't bind well with soil and plants, meaning a relatively small part of the nutrients actually support the plant, whereas the rest ends up polluting and destroying environments. Also, they volatilize and pollute the air. They contaminate water sources, aquifers, with cancer-causing nitrates. They're very damaging to beneficial microbes in the soil, with ammonium sulfate being deadly to earthworms. In the small percentage of high nitrogen fertilizers that do get into plants force fast growth, resulting in weak and watery cell growth in sickly plants. The imbalance in weak cells thus created invite both insect pests and diseases. Here we see how chemical fertilizers kill the food web, destroying the nematodes, the anthropods, the fungi, the protozoa, bacteria, and nematodes, and so on. And what's interesting is many years ago I was in company with an agricultural officer from the Thai government in northeastern Thailand, and we were going down this roadway in the northeast looking at a large rice field, what had been a rice field, and he said, because of the use of chemicals, he says to me, those soils are totally dead. There is nothing alive in them. There are no frogs in the waters around here. There are no insects. There are no birds. The soil can grow nothing. It's just total death had occurred. I once spoke with Cornell University entomologist David Pimental, who's editor of the Handbook of Pest Management in Agriculture. He stated that the share of crop yields lost to insects had nearly doubled in the recent 40-year period, despite a more than tenfold, a 10 times increase in the amount of synthetic insecticides as well as the toxicity of these insecticides. And if this wasn't damning enough, it is also found that usually or often less than 0.1% of pesticide applications are actually reaching the targeted pests. So you wonder, where's the real science there? Or is it just a lot of money for the, I'm sorry, I missed my slide again. Okay, here we go. Catch up to where we are. If that happens, just let me know again. Viewing a modern textbook of domesticated crop diseases, it's amazing because it correlates so clearly with textbooks on medicine. Where it lists a wide range of degenerative diseases and fungal diseases and nutritional deficiency diseases, and we see the same thing in plant pathology textbooks. And the scientist G.T. Wrench makes the comment, I take it that what has happened to man has happened no less to his domesticated plants. Science has done marvelous things in variety and fragmentation, but has torn plants from the traditional conditions on which their health depends. And he says, there's no doubt, I think modern man has made plant life into his own image. You know, there are many mysteries in this world, and in the earth itself, in the soil, are found mysteries that we can hardly imagine. Just 1 teaspoon of living soil contains more living organisms than the entire human population on this planet. Billions of these organisms. Soil bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and arthropods, still unknown to science. It's evident we need to more fully respect the fabric of the living systems of the earth that our Maker has made and that we walk upon. We see the soil food web in which organic matter then feeds the bacteria, fungi, and nematodes, and it goes on to higher levels, and finally to the birds and to the animals. There are actually 5 levels called the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth entire trophic levels. So what we feed the earth has enormous impacts on everything above the earth. You know, when we put plant type or humus fertilizer, it will send glyconutrients or what we would refer to as sugar nutrients and starches down to the plant's roots to feed bacteria at the rhizosphere, and this is all done in a symbiotic relationship. And in turn, the bacteria will feed the plants and roots with a boost of nitrogen, and also the plants, of course, get a lot of nitrogen from the atmosphere and multiple micronutrients in a steady stream. And then these are all more easily and healthfully absorbed by the plants, unlike chemical fertilizers. If we go back thousands of years, and this is going to get quite interesting because the last third of this presentation is going to talk a lot about what this next paragraph says. It says, many thousands of years ago, Earth's soils had an abundance of major and minor trace minerals. And this combined with high atmospheric oxygen levels ensured incredible health, great stature, and longevity for all living creatures on the Earth's surface. And I'll give you some interesting, fascinating evidence about that later in the presentation. Soils abundant in minerals are vibrantly alive with billions of microbes feasting on the mineral elements and imparting into the plants nutrients critical for sustaining optimum health of the plants and everything that partakes of plant life. Here we see on one side the dead commercialized soil, which basically have killed billions of these microorganisms, versus soil that is damp and alive, in which you have as many as 1 billion bacteria in 1 teaspoon, and many more in many cases. Here we see some alarming statistics. This is from the Nutrition Security Institute. Between the years, this is, you know, from the early 20th century to getting into the late 20th century, 1914 to 97. I'm sorry I don't have a later table, but you see here, this is an average in milligrams of calcium, magnesium, and iron found in the following 4 foods: cabbage, lettuce, tomatoes, and spinach. If you go back to 1914, this would be in North America, it was roughly 400 milligrams of these 2 key minerals, calcium and magnesium, in these foods. Whereas if you go back, or rather if you go forward in time rather to 1948, which is what, about 30 years later, you see a massive drop down to about 150 milligrams. If you come up to 1963, you're down to only about 70 milligrams. And it seems to have stabilized through to 1997 at that level, and it's probably dropped since then, which is a pretty frightening thing to think about. A recent report using U.S. agricultural records has found that the nutrient content of fruits and vegetables has been rapidly dropping since records were first taken back in the early 1960s. About, well, I guess it would be more than 50 years now. It's more like 60 years ago. I got to update the slide. To illustrate this point, you'd need to eat 5 apples today just to get the same level of nutrients you would have found in 1 apple in the year 1965. So that's why having your own garden, having your own small orchard, replenishing the soil is so critical to your health and well-being. In the late 1940s, A typical bowl of spinach would had roughly 158 milligrams of iron. By 1982, which is what, 42 years later, the same quantity of spinach on average would contain less than 2.2 milligrams of iron. So a massive loss, thousands of percent. I mean, just enormous loss. Way over 150 milligrams lost in one bowl of spinach. The mineral content found in corn in the 1920s was 5%. Today, it is less than 1%. So again, it's a several 100% loss occurring in corn crops. So everywhere we look, we see this phenomena. As minerals go down in plant life, diseases go up in whoever or whatever is eating those plants. Here we see the various health conditions listed to the left, such as heart disease, chronic bronchitis, and so on. And we see percentage increases in the 14-year period between 1980 and 94. You have like 18% increase, and it mentions in the right column, right here, the specific minerals associated with these particular diseases. So chromium, copper, magnesium, potassium, selenium. If there's a deficiency, your heart disease is going to go up. And as we can see, the percentages in the third column, right here, are, for instance, in bone deformities, you have an 84.9, whereas here it's already up to 124. So it's a massive increase in calcium, copper, fluoride, magnesium can prevent birth or bone deformities. That can happen especially in, of course, gestation, as well as children particularly are subject to these issues of bone deformities. Asthma, chronic bronchitis, tinnitus, but the pattern is consistent right across. Roughly 100 trace minerals and elements are deficient in human diets virtually everywhere in the world. And the importance of minerals for health is well established in the biomedical research literature. If we just take one trace mineral, such as zinc, and a person is deficient in that, the following symptoms can occur: acne, infertility, poor vision, stretch marks, allergies, PMS, premenstrual or premenstrual syndrome, poor memory, mental and emotional problems, and poor growth in children. So, oh, I'm sorry, am I behind again? Why don't you, oh, sorry. It's, maybe, great idea, take the clicker, okay. We're where we should be. I have to apologize. Today let's see, we did that. Let's go on to the next one. Nature's sensors. Satellite photographs of Africa have shown how giant flights of locusts will cover thousands of miles, ignoring healthy vegetation, and then descend and destroy fields where the soil has been worn out. So they actually act as nature's sensors. This parallels the relationship of microbes to disease. If you think about it, microorganisms, pathogenic microorganisms, act as nature's sensors. And they become pathogenic and proliferate only when the human host or animal host has been imbalanced and weakened by factors such as stress, malnutrition, endo, and environmental toxins. Next slide. The British imperial botanist, Sir Albert Howard, through regenerating his soils experimentally when in India, came to understand the true role of disease in agriculture is that of sensors. He says disease resistance is the natural reward of healthy, well-nourished protoplasm. Pesticide usage is unscientific and radically unsound. This is taken from a paper he did in the Empire Cotton Growing Review on the role of insects and fungi in agriculture. He says animals that fed on his crops, and his crops were grown on totally regenerated soils, became immune to all known diseases. To quote him, although epidemic diseases such as rinderpest, hoof and mouth disease, septicemia frequently devastated the countryside, none of my animals were segregated. None were inoculated. They frequently came in contact with disease stocks, and no case of infection or infectious disease ever occurred. So we see there sort of the key to true immunity. It isn't some vaccine with adjuvants such as aluminum hydroxide or thimerosal that poison the mind and the body. No, it doesn't take that. All it takes is getting back to the critical nutrients that sustain immunity. That's true immunity, natural immunity. Next slide. The importance of the method of culture of food is primary, radical, and fundamental in the matter of health. And he mentions that nature endows life with a powerful eternal capacity to renew itself healthfully if the right conditions persist. And this is a book about long life among the Hunsas, the Wheel of Health. Hunsas were noted for their extreme longevity and unparalleled immunity to disease. They had 2 feet of topsoil because as the riverbed silt coming off the glaciers as the ice ran against them and into the river, this silt was saturated with a full spectrum of macro and micronutrients, and they would apply that routinely to the soils. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned it here, but in Hunza, when the babies are born, they have all their teeth fully developed in their mouths. In the early 20th century, Sir Robert McCarrison, a very prominent British physician, was amazed at the health and immunity record of the Hunzas, who, although surrounded on all sides by people afflicted with all kinds of degenerative and pestilential diseases, still did not contract any of them. They were immune to all degenerative diseases and immune to all infectious diseases. Julius Hensel, a miller in Germany in the 19th century, first discovered the incredible agriculture value of rock dust when he was grinding his grain. He noticed that some of the rock powder accidentally had mixed into his meal. He later sprinkled it over his garden he just planted, and the results astonished him. He repeated the experiment, this time with fruit trees. To his amazement, his apple trees, which had previously borne wormy, imperfect fruit, now produced the finest fruit free from all worms. We're on the wrong slide there. Can you go forward? Bread from stones. There, that's what I just read. Okay. Now we'll go to the next slide. Perfect food and disease immunity. Samson Morgan, who was a British horticulturist, experimenter, made the following observation, taken from his book, Clean Culture, The New Soil Science. My long continued studies in the dust have convinced me that diseases in soils, plants, and men arise from conditions brought about by the introduction of poisons and by an imperfect environment. And beyond all doubt, he says, perfect food might even in time render the human race invulnerable to disease. Go to the next slide. It talks about antibiotics are a plant's immune system. They're not really designed for humans. We do not produce antibiotics, nor do we need to. If our immune system and our endocrine and nervous systems have the mineral, vitamin, protein, and enzyme substances found in food grown on mineral-rich soils. And of course, our immunity is directly linked to the condition of planet Earth. Now we're going to look at regenerating soil health. Since we have depleted sick soils from long ages of erosion, leaching, overgrazing, and chemical farming, we need a solution. And it mentions here using, again, finely ground rock dust, which restores a broad range of missing minerals, the very same minerals that existed in the earth before the flood, because all of these minerals are taken from rocks and stones. Stones and rocks form the skeletal structure of the outer surface of the earth, and they contained all the minerals of which the soils before the flood consisted. If you know Spirit of Prophecy, biblical history, there were 3 successive curses of the earth. The first at the sin in Eden of our first parents. The second when Cain slew his righteous brother Abel out of jealousy. And the last and most severe curse being when the earth was destroyed by a flood because of the vast wickedness of the human population. And so we can today replenish the earth and to some extent return it to its original, pre-flood conditions. Anyway, the question's asked, why remineralize? Why put stone dust on the earth. It'll provide slow release of vital elements and trace minerals. It'll increase nutrient intake in plants. The flavor of the food will, you got it. The flavor of the food will improve. Greater health in animals and humans will result. There'll be more earthworm activity, more microorganisms alive and thriving. It'll increase crop yields by as much as 200 to 400%. It'll increase resistance to plant diseases, to insect pests, to frost, and to drought. I remember my father-in-law had a small garden, and every year, this is in Canada, they'd get these, what were they called? They would come and destroy all the potato bugs. So I did bring in a truckload of stone dust, put it on, and it virtually wiped out that problem. You know, the potato bugs were a thing of history, but that used to happen every year. The problem, which was resolved. Anyway, it increases resistance to these things. It also has resistance to frost, which orange growers would like to know about. It rebalances soil pH, it builds humus complex and prevents erosion, and decreases dependence on chemical approaches, of course. Next slide. And we have, for instance, in the stone quarries, millions of tons of mineral finds in both the aggregate and stone industries, and so we can use those, and they're very inexpensive. There are a lot of quarries that will literally deliver it almost free because they just want to get rid of this stuff. Because when they make certain types of rock products, they get all this dust and it's just sitting there. They don't know what to do with it. Samson Morgan, again, going back to him in England, he made the same observations about the diseases in plants, animals, and humans that can be eradicated through remineralization. And he also employed aeration. And some of his experiments were incredible. In these vast orchards and gardens, there were huge increases in output and giantism in foods. He grew 2-pound pears. He had apples, which included the largest apple ever recorded at 34.5 ounces and exceeding a foot in circumference, onions averaging 1 pound in weight, and celery up to 40 inches in length. Next slide. And at the time he was doing these experiments in the early 20th century, the average potato yield in the world stood at roughly 6 tons per acre, and wheat 15 bushels per acre. Morgan stated, "I broke all records for potatoes, digging fine samples at the rate of 65 tons an acre." That's an increase from 6 tons to 65. That's a 10-fold increase. A success never achieved by any other experimenter. And as for wheat, instead of only producing 15 bushels an acre, he was producing up to 100 bushels per acre. He aptly concluded the colossal loss of foodstuffs through the present system as criminal. In the semi-arid region of the U.S. with average corn yields under 25 bushels, a man named Hamaker, who wrote the book Survival of Civilization, which talked about the loss of soil fertility is actually creating climate issues. And it's very scientifically written. Basically saying that if we do enter into what they call global warming, it'll be very, very short-lived because of the evaporation. It'll then very quickly react and plummet into global freezing. Sort of not a pleasant prospect. He says, upon analysis, he said he found his corn compared with the corn grown at nearby farms using standard chemical approaches. His corn had 28% more protein, 47% more calcium, 57% more phosphorus, 60% more magnesium, and 90% more potassium. Savage, a fellow named Albert Savage, taken from the book by Bernard, Superfoods from Super Soil. Marketed spinach grown in ordinary soils have about 600 to 1,600 parts per billion iodine. Spinach grown in my remineralized soils contained as high as 640,000 parts per billion. Massive, massive increase. He said testing revealed that his food crops had as much as 400% more iron and other minerals than crops grown using conventional growing methods. And it's a long presentation, so I'm going to sort of skip over these fairly quickly. But it talks about certain groups who are growing, let's see here, pine seedlings for agroforestry purposes. By using remineralized through stone dust approaches, after 24 years, the wood volume was 400% greater than in untreated areas. So you had a massive increase in the amount of wood output. It said one application of rock dust was effective for a period of 60 years. So you don't have to go out and do this every year. Men of the Trees, they're an international volunteer society who planted 500,000 trees annually in arid climates in 48 countries all over the world. They found using granite dust, they had a 500% greater growth rate for treated trees versus controls of the same species. Potting time was reduced from 5 months to only 6 weeks. Then we have a disease in California trees called sudden oak death. And this, the conventional approach is to use a diddly chemical to try and kill the parasitic pathogen using pesticide type approach, whereas he used the painting of tree bark with alkaline mineral wash and adding mined mineral powder from stone, azomite, with 70 active minerals. In a few years, new growths appeared and the bleeding of the bark was rectified. So you see on one side of this series of photographs, the trees, the leaves are dying, the bark was dying. As you move across the screen to the right, you see the tree has completely been regenerated. Similar results in the bottom left. We see massive improvements in these pine trees. This is a garden in Scotland that uses stone dust to regenerate soils. And as you can see, the massive size of their plants holding in their hand. Also, what's interesting is you all remember Chernobyl, where not too many here who wouldn't. That radiation poisoning spread as the winds blew over Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and so on. And what was fascinating was very close to Chernobyl, someone grew a garden and they used this method of remineralizing through stone dust. And when they went to do the radioactivity tests on the plants, there was virtually no radioactivity, even though it had a massive amount of exposure to radiation. And so what's interesting, it applies not only to plants but to humans as well. Humans eating remineralized soils have a capability of resisting radiation poisoning implanted in them through all these trace minerals being in the human body. It protects the soil, it protects the plants, humans, animals from radioactivity. And by the way, if you do happen to get a radiation exposure, the best way to get it out is just go and soak in the ocean, because the minerals in the salt water will pull the radiation out of the human system through the pores. So anyway, it's just something nice to know. Now this is the part of the presentation you'll find quite fascinating. That's good because it's getting longer into the presentation. You might be falling asleep. But if we go back historically, and this is based on a research of a man named Roy Moody, who did a series of articles at the University of Chicago entitled The Antiquity of Disease. And he mentions these fascinating observations. He first says disease was not present in the earliest times of Earth's history, as far as, can you turn the mic down a little? As far as animals and plants are concerned. Disease did not exist with the most ancient bacteria. In the earliest periods, physical injuries and wounds were free from infections. Present evidence suggests that a wide distribution of the bacterial types and resulting pathology is a recent phenomena. So what I see here in these findings is really correlates very well with what we talked about early in the presentation. That when the soil is healthy, when the earth is healthy, when there's a lot of oxygen, pathogenic bacteria is not pathogenic, it's harmless. And what happens is I can't talk about too much about it, but Rife, who did experiments, was able, for instance, to take animals, and by changing the media they were feeding upon, he could take harmless Bacillus coli and watch it be converted in an animal to typhus, which is a pathogenic bacteria. And then he could reverse the process by changing the food they were feeding upon, and he did this through his very advanced microscopes that he developed. So that was about the same time RC developed the electron scope. But that's another issue. But what I'm trying to say here is that when we talk about diddly viruses and diddly bacteria, these conditions of being pathogenic is a consequence of degeneration. In other words, as the Earth has degenerated, as the atmosphere has degenerated, as human health and longevity has degenerated, as animals have degenerated, we have become susceptible to these sensors of nature that destroy that which is unhealthful. When a person dies, they return to the Earth. They have no more life or health in them. They're goner and they return to the Earth. And so nature is constantly at work to return to the Earth that which needs to be returned to the Earth. And as we breed disease in our body, we become susceptible to all these pathogens. Research on the fossil remains of early human life found the following. This is from Alice Herdlicka, who's a writing in anthropology and medicine. He's a paleopathologist. He says there's no trace he found in the adults of any destructive constitutional diseases, but a little bit of disease in the alveolar processes, meaning a little bit of issues with the lung. It appears, therefore, that on the whole, early man was remarkably free from diseases that would leave any trace or evidence in their bones or their teeth. So he corroborated the research that Moody did. And Ellen White says the same thing, like in Patriarchs and Prophets and other writings, that early man was free from disease. You know, it's really a recent phenomena. We also see enormous longevity and size, stature in the animal creation as well as in the plant kingdom. Here we see, let me get my, we see here this, at the very top, you see a human skeleton to the far left, and on the skeleton's left is this creature. Any guess what that is? It's a bat. And that bat is bigger than the man. It's quite interesting. And then we see a super crocodile, a skeleton found in the North African Sahara, 40 feet long, 10 tons, it's 20,000 pounds, and a 6-foot skull and jaw. It's a massive creature. These were all this, pre-flood type phenomena, what we saw in the animal creation. There was a bullfrog called Beelzebufo, who was the size of a large beach ball, 16 inches in length and weighing 10 pounds. And there you see him pictured sitting in front of a modern-day frog. Here we see the Teratorn with a wingspan of up to 24 feet in width, weighing about 172 pounds, reconstructed in a museum actually in Argentina. This turtle, beneath it, from tip to flippers, is 20 feet across, and that's in the Yale Museum in Connecticut. And then we see at the bottom a modern beaver with the white skeletal structure, and then you see above it a ancient beaver, the size of a modern-day black bear. So as you can see, there was massive degeneration of the size of animal life, and human beings as well. We know that humans were once of giant stature. This was taken from Time magazine, November 16, 1925. It talks about miners up in the Chihuahua Mountains of Mexico, found in a cave a group of skeletons measuring from crown to heel. They stood 10 to 12 feet in height. Anthropologists set off to examine these giants. A 12-foot man, by the way, with normal body proportions, not too thin or not fat, just normal, would weigh close to 2,000 pounds. So there's this exponential growth in size as you increase in height. We see from New Smyrna News, not very far from here, about 30 miles away, 6th of January, January 5th, 1917, New Smyrna News, page 6. Giants inhabited Florida. State geologist Sellards and Professor May, Carnegie Institute, concur in their opinion after fossil study at Vero, say men grew 12 feet tall. The human beings were of enormous size, as evidenced in the bones, some being as high as 10 to 12 feet in height. Then we have the Archaeologist and Journal of Antiquarian Science, the United Kingdom, back in the mid-19th century. It says in December of 1601 in Cumberland, in the UK, a human giant was found buried 12 feet into the ground. The giant was 4 yards and a half long. Forehead was 2 spans and a half broad. Translated 13 and a half feet tall and 22 inches across in the forehead. So what's fascinating is the fact that with degeneration has come the declension in human stature, as well as human longevity, as well as human health. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the well-known historian Flavius Josephus challenged anyone who ridiculed the idea that early generations of man had remarkable longevity. He says, let nobody compare the lives of the ancients with our lives in the few years we now live and think that what we're saying about them is false. He then talks about all these historians and scholars of ancient civilizations, and he was writing 2,000 years ago, who affirmed that the lifespan of early man extended into centuries, as the Genesis record states, and not decades. The Chaldean, these are all the various historians, Berosus, Egyptian, Manetho, and Hieronymus, Phoenician, Mochus, Syrian, Nicholas, Greek, Hestius, Eucatius, Hellenicus, and Epirus. All these ancient historians verify the Genesis record, saying men lived in centuries, ancient man. The integrity of our human health and the heredity and the genetics of our ancestors is maintained precisely to the degree we are providing the key, that we're overcoming the key deficiencies in the earth. The natural creation is embedded with a higher wisdom in order and balance, but we must give it what it requires to be healthy and balanced. Consequently, if we want to have strong health, we must have a recognition that the foundation of health is the soil. And we must work with the soil and regenerate the soil. And in fact, this is the most essential strategy for effecting the regeneration physically and mentally of humankind through these measures of regenerating our soils. So one last slide here, and that is, there's a website called Remineralize the Earth. It's operated by Joanna Compe in Massachusetts, and it has a lot of fascinating material, a lot of research related to this issue, and resources. So I would just recommend that to you. It's easy to remember, Remineralize the Earth. Okay, thank you very much, and have a blessed Sabbath. Okay.
Do you have any questions? Can you take some questions?
Yeah, for a couple. Yeah, I'm going to turn the light on. Yeah.
We have
Oh, yeah.
In your opinion, sir,
Yeah.
why does our land-grant universities in the entire U.S. teach something that even...
Yeah.
Why don't our land-grant universities teach something that even resembles this? In your opinion, why have these universities got away from this?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is a cousin of mine once went to Harvard University Law School, and he had dinner with me after. He said, well, I learned 2 important things at Harvard Law School. There are 2 things that control the world: lies and money. And
Not necessarily in that order.
yeah, so much of what is driven in our universities relates to business interests. The chemical industry is very powerful, just like the drug industry. And they want to push chemical fertilizers. And so they ensure that no money goes to these universities for their research, etc., unless they're along the lines they want them to research. So that's, a factor. We've got to keep in mind, too, if you believe in the Bible, it talks about that the world is in confusion. It refers to the world systems as Babylon, which means confusion. And the Bible refers to Satan, the powers of darkness, as the prince of the world. So he has a vested interest in defacing the image of God in humanity. So he helps to ensure that false systems of belief and spurious practices that damage human life and health are happening. And so if you saw my presentation this morning, we talked about doctors' strikes leading to improved health conditions. Not because doctors are bad, but because doctors have been brainwashed into using drugs that destroy human health instead of the medicines God has created. So it's the same principle at work. I believe the enemy is creating confusion. He is trying to perpetuate systems of healing, systems of agriculture that do more harm than good. And he's been very successful at that. So all we can do is fight against error with truth and with enlightenment and hope that some will change and improvement will occur. That's all we can do.
My family is in the certified organic business. We've been certified organic for over 20 years.
Right.
We're down in Claremont.
Right.
But my dad graduated from the University of Florida in 1939. Okay. All the land-grant universities were, at that time, were taught the Albrecht method of soil balance, and Dr. Albrecht from the University of Missouri. Okay. After World War II, they did away with the Albrecht method. New president, new staff, new girlfriends. They came in with what they call the pH method of soil balancing. I graduated from UF in 1965. I was taught the pH method. My dad knew the Albrecht method. We worked together in Lake County in the citrus business, and my dad always, we ended up calling each other bad names, and he would say, "You never learned anything other than to chase pH." He said, "You never learned anything about soil chemistry, physics, and biology." So I'm the oldest of 5 boys, and I got 2 sons, and we're all in the organic business. And we all went to a class about 10 years ago taught in Sikeston, Missouri, that taught the Albrecht method of soil balancing. If I had not learned that, no way would I be successful in the organic arena, because everything that I learned was totally opposite of what you're teaching right here.
Right. Thank you for those comments.
Explain a little bit about Albrecht. Just tell us what that is.
Well, Dr. Albrecht was at the University of Missouri, and you can Google Albrecht method of soil balancing or just Dr. Albrecht, and you will see that it's a whole nother complete science on soil chemistry, physics, and biology. Like I said, I was never taught at the University of Florida. Not being taught today. I have 3 grandkids up there now. And so he did, all of his work was back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and some in the 50s of exactly what he is addressing, where we completely got away from studying the minerals that's in the soil. And that's what Dr. Albrecht did. Regardless of what crop you were growing, he pinpointed exactly what you had to have. And until I took the Albrecht method back until I studied it, when you sent a soil sample into a lab, all they showed you, and let's just talk about calcium, for example, all they showed you was how many pounds of calcium was available, okay? And just go down, zinc, manganese, iron, boron, copper. It only shows what's available. It does not show you what's not available, okay? So once you see that, let's talk about manganese. That's a big deficiency in all of Lake County soils. Manganese may only be available 50 parts per million to a root, whether it's citrus or corn or spinach or whatever. But the total amount is like 1,000 pounds. So all the manganese you need is there in the soil. You just got to figure out the chemistry of how you can make it release and be available. And this is what we refer to as the Albrecht method of soil balancing. That's what you learn. And it doesn't matter if you're doing it in a little old box, growing 2 tomato plants in there, or 100 acres of citrus out here.
Okay, thank you.
Pardon?
Could you spell that name?
Spell the name. It's ALBRECHT.
Right.
I believe that's correct. You can Google it and it'll...
Yeah.
Pardon?
Yeah.
You can Google it and trust me, you'll be reading for the next couple of months.
Yeah, I want to make a quick mention. I have a friend who's a retired pastor. He's quite elderly now. Lost touch with him. He said he and his wife were assigned to a church in northern Georgia, and they acquired a property, and they were told by that they loved to put in gardens wherever they lived. And all the neighbors said, don't plant a garden there. It's a waste of time. Nothing will grow on these soils. It's just horrible. And you're just wasting your time. So he said, well, you know, I still think I should do this. So he had a truck brought in, a pickup of, and it had all stone dust on it. He poured it where the garden was, mixed it into the soil, and he said it was like a jungle coming out of his garden. He said he was hauling bushels of produce to all the neighbors who were astounded. You know, so I mean, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, because the Creator has put, you know, into the stones all the wide spectrum minerals that are required for soil health. Of course, you need humus, soil aeration, and these other factors, but the minerals are really critical for the health of the plants, the soil, and you know, we who eat the end product. Interestingly, a prominent scientist who is into this told me that he only eats foods grown on remineralized soils, and all of his gray hair turned black again. So just something interesting to think about. Anyway.
I noticed with the discussion, ever since I can remember, every spring before we planted, whether it's a house garden or whatever, you manured the garden. Or you did it in the fall and let it sit and then turned it over in the spring and so on and so forth. But you haven't mentioned anything about, quote, manure at all.
Well, the reason I haven't is Morgan's work, he believed that, number one, manure is, especially cow manure, is very high in nitrogen. And excessive nitrogen is not healthy for plants, at least that kind of nitrogen. And it causes rapid growth, it causes watery cells, it causes loss of flavor in the food. It's just not natural. God didn't want us to put fecal matter all over our soils. And the problem is it can introduce microorganisms, especially if it's fresh manure. Disease matter, but if the cow is diseased and the disease is in the manure, it can go right into the plant. So you can transmit disease that way. That's why anybody who uses manure who knows better will use, you know, totally dried old manure. They don't use anything fresh. It can be dangerous.
Yeah, that's why we always let it set over the winter and then turned it over in the springtime, so it had a chance to leach out of the soil, so to speak. But is that really maybe a waste of time as opposed to this mineralization?
Well, in a sense it is, because if they're eating depleted grass, you're not going to get any added mineral nutrients out of the manure than what's in the grass that the cow ate. So this is a more advanced method. It deals more with the root of the issue. It's a bit like a meat eater is getting their protein secondhand, because the cow has to get their protein from the grass, so you're getting the protein on a secondhand basis, not a first-hand basis. Same principle. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, my wife and I heard of the rock dust, and we were looking, but we couldn't find it anywhere. Could you tell us where we can get rock dust for our garden?
Well, Florida could be more problematic because you don't have a lot of stone quarries. It's mostly sand here, isn't it?
Depends on where you are.
Yeah, I guess more northern Florida, there must be some quarries. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean...
This is pretty good soil.
Yeah.
You go further north, it gets better and better.
As you go further north.
Compared to the whole state of Florida,
Yeah.
the good soil starts right here in Umatilla and goes on.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so you could probably haul some down from northern Florida. It might cost you more, but... Anyway, maybe one more question. It's been a long day, and
Yeah.
I'm ready to call it a day.
I like to, first of all, I like to thank Pastor Putt that he is bringing us these truly interesting seminars. And I just want to say a few experiences that I have made. The pharmaceutical industry, with all her drugs, you know, they killed my husband. And I said, when I was having certain problems, I'm not going to go this way. So I changed, and I did not take any pharmaceutical drugs anymore. And I have here a wonderful lady next to me, Dr. Betty. And now if I buy some supplements, I call her up and I say, Dr. Betty, what do you think of this? Is this good or is this not good? And she has great knowledge, and she says, no, this is just a scam, throw it away. And I'm so grateful that I have advice like this. And I have now changed my little garden that I have, where I have lemons and limes and things like this, not giving them any fertilization that you can buy, but I save all my kitchen scraps from salad and apple and oranges, cut them up and put them in my blender, and then I water my fruits and vegetables with that. And to my wonderful surprise, they're becoming so much bigger and so much better looking. So I think these little tips could help us here who have a little garden. Yeah. So don't throw your kitchen scraps away, but use them. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'll just make one last comment. When I was living in Northern California, I had a Japanese woman approach me about her wanting to introduce a new herbal medicine from Japan to the United States. And she was growing them at her property, this particular herb. I can't recall exactly what it was for now, but it was for a specific health condition. So I said to her, why don't you try putting stone dust on your herbs and see what difference it makes? So she said, okay, I'll do it experimentally. I'll just do it with some and not with the others. So about a month later, she called me all excited. You got to come down and check out my herb garden. So I went down, and she said, look, these are the ones that are, you know, being given normal fertilizers, and this is the group with the stone dust. And I noticed they were like 100 to 150% higher, more than double the height. And to taste the difference, so I tasted the herbs that were untreated with stone dust, and they had a very bitter taste. And I tasted the others, and it was super sweet. Because you'll find that the more minerals there are in the food, even radishes become sweet. It just sweetens the food. So if you enjoy eating healthy sweets, then, you know, remineralizing your soils will produce that. Oh, Maria? Oh. Okay, can we make it quick?
How much stone dust should you put on, and should you take a soil test first, and is there a better place to get a soil test than just through your local?
Well, there's just so many factors. You know, it's difficult to prescribe this much or that much. What has been found is that once it's put into the soil, it's converted into soil very quickly. It increases the microorganism level in the soil. You see very rapid changes occur in the soil. And as I said, it's important to include humus as well, not just the minerals, the dust. Also, if you can aerate the soils, that helps with the nitrogen issues. But I can't really prescribe any given amount. Maybe you could talk to this guy. He knows more about those technicalities. Anyway, I got to call it a day, but thank you very much for listening. Oh. Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you coming and sharing, and we're all looking to get some stone dust. But now we just need to figure out how to get it down here. Does anyone know where you can get? Do you know if there's a stone dust available anywhere?
Well, you can Google.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the easiest way to find it. I don't know if anybody in Central Florida. So.
Right. Right. Well, sand.
Let me just share one thing.
Where's the microphone? Maria, please. Microphone. Just hang in for 1 sec, because we'll just put it on. We'll make sure it gets on.
Thank you. Let me share one thing. And my expertise is citrus, okay, but we do have organic peaches, blueberries, green beans, just go down the list. We grow all of it. But if you have a citrus tree in your yard, okay, regardless of the age of it, planted around here, and you're worried about greening, okay, go to Home Depot and buy a 50-pound bag of black cow compost. It's with a K, K-O-W. Okay, put that whole bag of black cow compost under that tree from the trunk out to what we call the drip line. Okay, now go to, and I'll say Publix because I know they got it. Look for organic brown sugar. Okay, do not get white sugar. White sugar is contaminated with glyphosate. Organic brown sugar, they don't use glyphosate on it. And for that tree, take a cup, after you spread the black cow compost, take a cup of the brown sugar and sprinkle on top of it. Okay, the sugar feeds the microbes that is in the black cow compost, and now they go down to the tip of the roots. They colonize the roots, and now we get a friendly relationship going on. The tree recognizes that it's been colonized with friendly microbes, and now he changes the exudates and starts feeding them, and that's how it fights off the greening. So, not guaranteed, but I'll tell you it works.
Very interesting.
Oh yes, yeah, you can do it in your garden. And the whole thing about the brown sugar, certified organic brown sugar, is it has positive energy in it. White sugar has negative energy. We don't recognize it, but everything that lives in that soil, like Raymond was talking about, they recognize it.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Obomsawin, thank you so much for coming, and thank you each one. If you gave us your contact information, we'll let you know. We'll put you in our database. We'll make sure you get an email for our next event. But you can put it in your calendar every third Saturday afternoon at 2:30. We have something health related here, and we'll let you know what it is. We'll send you an email. Thank you all very much. God bless you all. And let's just have a prayer and ask the Lord to bless our efforts as we try to stay healthy. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this information. Thank you, Lord, that in the beginning, when you created this earth, you created everything in perfect balance and in perfect health. And Lord, sin has brought about degeneration. But Lord, you are into the salvation business and into the regeneration business, and you're regenerating human beings through your divine power. And you're also, as we learn how to do it, you can regenerate the earth so that we can eat healthy food and we can reach our full potential health-wise. So thank you, Lord. Bless each one that's here, all the families that are represented too, and help us to apply what we've learned. And as we go through life, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.